University campuses are supposed to be a bastion for free speech and a breeding ground for critical thinking. Sure. We've all seen how this really plays out in the real world. Campus conservatives coming across as outsiders as much as any nerd or alien. When conservative students and lecturers alike share their ideals, they're often torn down, ripped to shreds, rhetorically speaking. You can imagine the reaction from certain members of the student body when Professor Janice Fiamengo came to talk at the University of Toronto. A woman questioning what's wrong with women's studies. A woman giving her open support to men and male victimization. Now let her explain how it all went down herself. Professor Janice Fiamengo joins us now from Ottawa. Professor Fiamengo, first of all, if we could just get your feminist credentials before we launch into what this crazy night was all about.
My feminist credentials are, I guess, that I was a feminist, a radical feminist, I suppose, graduate student. I did a PhD thesis in English that took a strongly feminist perspective. I read very widely in feminist theory. I was impressed and influenced by radical feminists like Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon and Robin Morgan and many of the second wave radical feminists. And I considered myself a feminist up until relatively recently, until I experienced affirmative action hiring and what it looked like, the picture of demonstrable injustice and discrimination, and then I rethought a lot of my feminist convictions.
So no doubt today's feminists and other high priests and priestesses of politically correct ideology on campus see you as a traitor, as an apostate, as it were.
Yeah, I'm not sure that they would use that kind of language necessarily, but certainly they, well, they would just say that I'm wrong. Probably they would admit that there are certain perhaps tendencies to exaggeration always in any kind of activist discipline. They might admit, that there's a tendency to man-blaming sometimes in women's studies courses or scholarship, but they would say that overall my dismissal of academic feminism is wrong-headed and maybe even dangerous, that I'm belittling the important gains that feminism has made and also the many challenges that remain. I think that would be their position.
All right, so take me to your visit to the campus. What happened?
Well, it was, I think, not as raucous or as melodramatic as the previous visit of Warren Farrell, speaking about the difficulties that boys and young men are facing in our society and the way that the school system in particular is failing them. That got really intense, abusive protest, as you know. And I think in a way the protest that remained for my talk was partly a hangover from the Warren Farrell event. Maybe if I had been brought in on my own, Janice Fiamengo, just an English professor, I don't know anyone would have been quite so excited about it. But there certainly was protest. I don't have any problem with that. It wasn't an attempt to stop people from attending, as far as I could tell. The fire alarm was pulled about 5 minutes before the talk was scheduled to go underway. Of course, we don't know who pulled it, but what are the chances that it was just an accident? And we were worried that that it would continue to be pulled and that the talk would be prevented from going forward. But fortunately, that didn't happen. And I have to say that there was no heckling during my talk. Some people got up and left as a statement of protest or disgust, and that's perfectly okay too, of course. And then there were angry questions, a little bit of shouting and rudeness in the Q&A, but nothing I would say that was inappropriate. So I can't complain about my treatment there. It was an example of the kind of heated, committed, I suppose one could say, a little bit raucous response that any controversial talk tends to inspire and should inspire, I suppose. I mean, in other cases, the shutting down of Ann Coulter at my own university, the shutting down of Christy Blatchford at the University of Waterloo, other attempts, much more serious to actually silence dissent. Those are the things that should really concern us. But my treatment was really pretty okay.
Professor Fiamengo, let me just nail down a couple of things so that we all understand what it is that they have a problem with. Do you see women's studies as the advancement of hate speech? Do you see women's studies on today's Canadian campuses as simply exercises in man-hatred?
Well, I don't like to use that phrase hate speech because I think people should be able to say what they want, and I don't believe in shutting down conversations with that term. But what I would say is that, as Barbara Kay has said as well, that women's studies is a man-blaming, if not man-hating kind of discipline. It really isn't a discipline. That's my point. This seems demonstrably true. It is the academic arm of a special interest lobby group. It is devoted to transforming our society because it believes that there are fundamental wrongs and injustices in our society. I don't have any problem with feminists advancing their ideological goals in our society. They've done much good in the past. Whether they're doing good now, I think is a big question. But where I do really have a problem, where my area of expertise is that women's studies claims to be an academic, scholarly discipline. And my point is that it isn't. It's not about the study of women's experiences in a scholarly manner. It is about indoctrination. And it uses statistics in very dubious ways. It advances a worldview that's based on women's, I would say, moral superiority as innocent victims of male violence. It advances a view of men as overwhelmingly brutal, dominating, aggressive. It advances the idea that if there were simply fewer masculine men in our society, we'd be much better off, that everything good in our society comes from women, that things that are bad in our society come from men, and that is an ideological agenda rather than a scholarly pursuit of truth at work there. And that's I think it does a lot of harm, and it simply isn't. It really doesn't have a place in the academy.
Why do you think that agenda, Professor, has so much political support in mainstream politics today?
Yeah, well, I think feminists have been incredibly successful in advancing their narrative about the world, and people have gone through now for generations and have been indoctrinated in this worldview, and it has affected certainly the media at large, the portrayal of men and women in our society. It has greatly affected our criminal justice system, especially the family law system. It has really, the feminists have been very successful in changing the way we understand masculinity and femininity, and I think that's too bad.
So explain to me, seeing as you're a scholar of the human condition, what is it about human beings that has prevented many of them involved in the political system from pushing back on this?
Preventing men, do you mean, from pushing back?
Whether they're men or women, the system has both men and women who enable this. So my question to you is, what is it in the current human condition that prevents people from pushing back? Is it just path of least resistance? Are they being intellectually lazy? Are they being morally lazy? You tell me.
Well, I think it's a combination of all of those things. We all know that it is very difficult to push back against a cultural hegemony, a worldview that has gained credence. It's now very much the case that if you want to put forward your bona fides as a speaker in the social or political realm, you have to really adopt a large part of the feminist orthodoxy. To do so, especially as a man, I think, is to seem to side with all sorts of things that are bad, to seem to side with violence, to seem to side with aggression. Nobody wants to do that, feminism is quite vicious sometimes about silencing its opponents, tarring them as advocates of the suppression of women, and who wants to be against that? It's very difficult to speak up.
Is this why it's so important for us to take what is going on campuses so seriously? Because let's face it, if feminists hadn't won this war on the battlefield called the university campus, you and I wouldn't even be discussing this right now.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think it's important now that as many people who can do speak out against the inaccuracies, the misrepresentations, the misuse of statistics. I mean, this is amazing, really. The wrongs of what they call equity hiring, which is one of the scandals of our age, and I'm shocked that more people don't speak against it. To see men disadvantaged in this way in government positions, certainly on university campuses, was shocking to me. And so it is time that that people spoke about it.
Janice Fiamengo, wish we had more time for the conversation. Thank you very much for what you're doing and for speaking out.
Thank you. It was lovely to speak to you.
Thank you.